What's up everybody, it's Jason. I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to the channel, and today we have a brand new album review for you today for what is technically still a brand new album, Sturgill Simpson's latest, Cuttin Grass Volume 1. Alright, so Cuttin Grass Volume 1, we've got a brand new album, but not necessarily brand new songs. Essentially what Simpson did for this album was just comb through his own discography and decided to pluck a couple of songs from a few of his older albums and basically just do bluegrass country covers of them. And now we have Cuttin Grass Volume 1. The only possible exception, I think, is a song on the album called I Don't Mind. I couldn't find that on any of his older albums, so it might just be a cover or a song that he never officially released. And with that, most of the songs off of Cuttin Grass come from his first studio album, High Top Mountain. There's also a couple from meta-modern sounds in country music, and I think one or two from A Sailor's Guide to Earth. Unsurprisingly, he didn't choose any songs from his latest album, Sound and Fury, to cover in Cuttin Grass, but this is Cuttin Grass Volume 1. So if in Cuttin Grass Volume 2 he comes out with a bluegrass cover of Sound and Fury, I think I'm gonna lose my mind. Alright, so the first thing I want to address is that I feel like a lot of people might roll their eyes at least the concept of this album. They might look at it like kind of a greatest hits release, like, oh, he's already released these songs, now it's just like in a new compilation, who cares? But I think I would go so far as to suggest the opposite. I think this album is actually a win-win for everybody, because I feel like throughout his discography, Sturgill Simpson has released very different types of album. High Top Mountain and Meta-Modern Sounds in Country Music were two very similar albums in a sense, and then you have Sailor's Guide to Earth and then Sound and Fury, which are two pretty radically different albums from his first two. So for the people who are fans of his earlier work, I think they're really going to get a kick out of this album because it's kind of like a return to form. He gets really back to that sound that you probably fell in love with in the first place. And then for the people who are fans of his newer work, you get reimaginings of those songs, and if you don't like them, you can always go back to the original. But I think to have the option of listening to two completely different versions of the same song is really fantastic. Alright, so let's get to the actual music. The subtitle of this album is The Butcher Shop Sessions, and from what I've read on this album, basically what happened is Sturgill Simpson went into a butcher shop with a 5-piece band, and they started playing through these songs, and what they played in that one take is the version that we hear on this album. Not a bunch of fancy editing, certainly not any autotune, it's just a bunch of really talented musicians playing in a room together. And that's the first thing I want to touch on with this album. The musicianship is excellent. And I think the best example of that musicianship is a track off the record called The Railroad of Sin. The original studio recording from the album High Top Mountain is already just kind of like a really aggressive, in-your-face song, but somehow in the Butcher Shop Sessions they managed to crank it up a few notches. Towards the end of that song, you have the mandolin, you have the guitar, and the fiddle all essentially soloing over each other at the same time, and it sounds like all the things could fall apart at any moment. Like one bad note, one sour note could mess up the entire thing. Very delicate, but yet somehow so controlled and aggressive. In fact, they're like each playing fast as humanly possible, but it doesn't fall off the rails, not once. And it's just, it's incredible how well balanced each of the instruments are and how much they kind of trust each other to stay in and out of the pocket at the same time, to use kind of like that drumming expression. Alright, so the next two songs I want to talk about are All Around You and Breaker's Roar. Those are the only two songs off of Cuttin Grass from his third studio album, A Sailor's Guide to Earth. And arguably A Sailor's Guide to Earth was a pretty dramatic departure in sound for Sturgill Simpson. His first two albums were very kind of traditional country sounding songs, and then all of a sudden you have A Sailor's Guide to Earth, which was just kind of, in a word, just more, the production was more, there was violins, there was trumpets, just like a brass section and an orchestral section. There was more experimentation with sound. So all in all, just a pretty dramatic departure from his previous just traditional country albums. And with that in mind, even if you haven't sat down and listened to Cuttin Grass yet, you could probably tell from the premise of it, just, you know, bluegrass covers of some of his older songs, you could see how the songs from the earlier albums would more easily lend themselves to the genre of bluegrass. So what I was really curious about was how he was going to translate songs from A Sailor's Guide to Earth and Sound and Fury into that kind of bluegrass genre. And obviously he didn't do it for Sound and Fury yet. Both songs like Breaker's Roar and All Around You, obviously it just would have been a much bigger challenge to translate that to the bluegrass genre. But I think they ended up doing a really commendable job with All Around You, especially if you've listened to the original version of that song. There's like a lot of trumpets and horns. It's just the beat of it and the cadence of it almost reminds me of Albert King's Born Under a Bad Sign, if you've ever heard that song. Fantastic song, by the way, you should definitely listen to it. But they took it and really seamlessly turned it into a bluegrass song. And if you hadn't heard the original, you probably would have never suspected it went from A to B. And again, a lot of that just ties back to the quality of musicianship back in that butcher shop. I also think they did a really good job of translating Breaker's Roar into a bluegrass song, but I will say Breaker's Roar was one of my favorite songs off of A Sailor's Guide to Earth, so I still prefer the original. But that doesn't by any means that the bluegrass cover isn't bad. With the two songs, even though they're the same song, they're basically two separate songs, and at that point it just becomes about preference. Now, I think another fair question to ask with this kind of an album is, were any of the songs enhanced by their bluegrass cover counterparts? And I will very happily say that yes, the two songs that come to mind in particular are Life Ain't Fair and the World Is Mean and Voices. Now, weirdly enough, with those two songs, I was actually drawn in by the same kind of thing. For some reason, when you strip those two songs down and just leave the quality of Simpson's voice and surround him with really great musicians, it enhances a song in a way that lets you listen more clearly to the lyrics, and just the mood of the song translates so much clearer when there's less clutter. Not that the original versions of those songs were just like heavy with auto-tune and extra instruments. It's certainly nothing like that. But I think that the raw nature of these recordings, and no, that's not necessarily a pun on the Butcher Shop sessions, but the raw nature of those recordings just kind of let some of the more silenced, I guess, nuances from the original studio recording shine through a little bit more. Ultimately, I think it just makes it easier to take those songs in. And of course, the only logical follow-up question to that is, were any of these songs made worse by their bluegrass cover versions? And look, guys, like I said earlier, it's really not fair to compare these songs because some of them are just so drastically different sounding from the original to the bluegrass cover version. But yes. And look, it's only like 2 songs out of 20-something of them off the album, but if I had to pick 2 of them, they would be Long White Line and Turtles All the Way Down. And they're definitely not bad versions of the song. I don't think there's a bad version of any song off of this album. The only difference with those 2 songs is, while I certainly preferred either the original or the bluegrass for a lot of these songs, for those 2, Long White Line and Turtles All the Way Down, I by far prefer the original to their bluegrass cover version. Okay, so Long White Line might have just been me, I'll admit. I kind of have a bias towards that song. It was one of the first ones I heard by Sturgill Simpson, and it'll always be one of my favorites from him. But from a musicality standpoint, I will say that I still think that the bluegrass country version leaves something out that was really important to the original, which was this kind of twang in the beat and overall tone of the song. It just didn't translate as well in a bluegrass version, which made me just feel like the original is as good as it could have been. I think more specifically, the original version of that song, to me, all I really hear is guitar, bass, and drums in Long White Line, the original version. But when you have the bluegrass version, obviously you have mandolin, banjo, fiddle, and guitar all in the background. So it's just, it can't possibly create that same kind of tone and atmosphere that the original did. So I'm not knocking it for that. That's the whole theme and point of Cuttin Grass. But like I said, I still just wholeheartedly prefer the original. Turtles All the Way Down is kind of a similar thing for me. There's just certain elements in the original. I think that was one of the first songs that I really heard him start to kind of experiment with sound that wasn't just instruments. Turtles All the Way Down, like Long White Line, was created to have a very special and unique tone, and you need a studio recording for that. For some reason, also vocally, I just felt like the original version of Turtles All the Way Down has kind of like a huskier Sturgill Simpson coming from his vocal pipes. Obviously, his voice in Cuttin Grass on all the songs is completely flawless. I think he has one of the strongest, nicest voices in country music right now. But again, overall, what really makes Turtles All the Way Down for me just one of the greatest songs off of Modern Sounds is really just the psychedelic vibe that it carries throughout. I mean, lyrically, it's just an acid trip if you really sit down and take the time to listen to the lyrics. Aliens cutting into you, whatever. But like I said with Long White Line, it just sounds that couldn't possibly be recreated by the kind of bluegrass band that he has with him. And not that it's a bad song as a bluegrass cover, I just, again, prefer the original wholeheartedly. Alright, so the last song I want to talk about off this album is called I Don't Mind. Like I said earlier, it's the only song off this album that I can't really trace back to an older album, so it might be a cover, or it might be just like a song that he hasn't released, I don't know. But the reason I think it's probably my favorite song off of Cuttin Grass is not just because it's something I haven't heard before, but because, I mean, as hard as these guys are playing for some of these songs, I Don't Mind has kind of this refrain, and it's so gentle and delicate in terms of execution that it just helps set it apart from the rest of the album. And with that, it's a song that I found myself going back to over and over again when I started listening to it for like the 3rd or 4th time even. The song is so well balanced between the vocals and the instrumentation that it just becomes really easy on the ears to listen to, and it feels like they give you enough breathing room to just kind of take it all in. I would even go so far as to say that it's one of those rare songs that when you listen to it, it actually feels like time and everything is just slowing down just a little bit. So like I said, I really do think that this album is a win-win for everybody. If you're a fan of his older stuff, you get kind of a return to form, to his like bluegrass country roots. If you're a fan of his newer stuff, you get new renditions of the songs that you already loved. So I don't think you can really go wrong with this album. And on top of that, this album offers such high quality musicianship and vocals that if you can't appreciate the genre or the sound, you could at least appreciate the talent that these people have. Alright, so that's going to do it for this review. Let me know what you guys think below, whether you liked it, hated it, didn't think it was necessary at all to have this album, whatever it might be, let me know below. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please like or subscribe below. It really helps out the channel. Until next time, stay safe, be kind. Thank you.